there have been rumors for many years that not only did the Nazis go to the moon, but that they escaped Europe, some of them, at the end of World War II, perhaps even Hitler himself and his deputy Führer, Martin Bormann, and they went to a secret base in Antarctica, Operation Paperclip. Google that if you don't know what it is, Operation Paperclip. There is a specific story and a couple of other stories about Antarctica's Queen Maud Land, named by Norwegian whalers after Queen Maud of Norway, a granddaughter of England's Queen Victoria, who liked to drink blood out of skulls, by the way. Historical facts are well documented about this expedition. German exploration of Antarctica reaches back to the 1800s. Most noted was the expedition in 1938 led by Captain Alfred Richter to Queen Maud Land, situated east of the Weddell Sea, named for the English seal hunter James Weddell. Prior to the start of the expedition, the German Society of Polar Research invited the famous explorer Richard E. Byrd, and yes, that is the same Richard E. Byrd who supposedly went to what we call the center of the Earth, which is associated with debunking theories. And what I mean by that is that the center of the Earth has a core, but there are parts of the Earth where we have underground cities and bases which are real, and some of them have even been videotaped. So they invited Richard E. Byrd to Hamburg, where he showed expedition members of this expedition that was going to be taking place documentary of his Antarctic exploration and told them what conditions to expect. Ironically, about 10 years later, the Navy's Admiral Byrd led his own military expedition to Antarctica. It was supposed to be a scientific expedition, but they took aircraft carriers and thousands of soldiers armed to the T for some reason.
Well, why not? You never know when you're going to run into a dangerous group of sea lions.
Right. Those ice fishers get really upset having to sit there all day.
That's right.
You never know what's going to happen. So, Capitan Richter renamed the area Neuschwabenland in honor of his flagship Schwabenland, a floating laboratory that belonged to the Lufthansa airline company. It carried 2 amphibious aircraft, about 10 tons each. It's well documented, part of a scientific experiment, if you will. Now, Richter's expedition were under direct order of the Reichsmarschall Hermann Goering, Rudolf Hess, and other influential members of the secretive Thule Society. We've heard about the Thule Society before. We've done segments on the Thule Society. Also involved with the Vril Society and the Theosophical Society.
Was that the Full Society?
The Thule Society, Thule. They actually were a big funder of the German Nazi Party rising to power. Officially on a mission to study the feasibility of whaling in those waters, Richter proceeded to drop small swastika flags along separate flight paths to the southern pole, eventually staking out more than 600,000 square kilometers for the Reich. Richter was fascinated by reports from that other guy named Waddell. One of his reports in 1823, Waddell wrote, I quote, "The ice in this region had completely disappeared. The temperature is mild. Birds were observed flying around the ship, and groups of whales frolicked in the wake of the craft." And, end quote. It has been suggested that the Richter expedition found just such a place, one that contained huge ice caverns filled with warm water and living plants. Have you ever heard about this before, Nick?
No, this is new.
This is new stuff. Yes. Have you ever heard of the Hollow Earth theory? We talked about Hollow Moon last night. Have you heard about the Hollow Earth?
No.
You've never heard of the Hollow Earth theory?
Have not.
Interesting. I guess a lot of people believe that the center of the Earth is hollow, and there's a sun in the middle, right, which is kind of symbolic because the core is the hottest,
right,
but it's a lot of dense metals. But as I mentioned before, the Hollow Earth in another way is really just caverns, right, within the crust of the Earth.
Sure.
So reportedly, these Germans discovered areas containing caves, one of which was reported to have led to a large underground lake warmed from geothermal heat. Persons in both Norway and Britain were aware of these ice-free areas, but chose to suppress the information. They left them off of maps to prevent other nations from laying claim. Antarctica, theoretically, is the perfect secluded hideaway, as it is approximately 5,600 miles from Africa, 4,760 miles from Australia, and 1,870 miles from the southernmost tip of South America. Richter and Schwabenland returned to Hamburg in April of 1939. But with war fears rising that year and Hitler's attack on Poland in September, the German expedition was quickly forgotten, all but by the higher Nazi command. By the mid-1940s, submarine bases had been built in New Schwabenland that became the sites of a great buildup of supplies and materials in addition to servicing U-boats operating in the South Atlantic. This site served as the southernmost point in a Nazi triangle of influence including South Africa and Argentina, which is where some people reported seeing Adolf Hitler and Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death, after the war was over. This major base became known as New Berlin, or Base 211. This new base in Antarctica, and this is all documented and this is all well true. The further extent of this story is what we're trying to uncover. German Navy Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz stated in 1943, quote, "The German submarine fleet is proud of having built for the Führer in another part of the world a Shangri-La on land, an impregnable fortress." The Norwegian Nazi Vidkun Quisling, at the trial of Nuremberg in 1945, stated, and I quote, "I believe I fought for a just cause and I refused to run away from my responsibilities when the Nazis, shortly after their final collapse, offered to convey me aboard a submarine to safe refuge." There was also reports that when Allies closed in on the capital, before Hitler supposedly shot himself, that there was a mass UFO sighting over Germany, and many high-ranking officials in the Reich were taken aboard these UFOs and disappeared. People say that those are aliens, and they were connected with the Vril Society and communicating with otherworldly spirits and creatures. I don't think that was that. I think it was probably German flying saucers, which they perfected, and we're going to get a little bit of that information coming up. The question of how the Nazis could have kept such a large base secret was explained in part by W.A. Harbinson, who stated, and I quote, "Regarding the possibility of the Germans building self-sufficient underground research factories in the Antarctic, it has only to be pointed out that the underground research centers of Nazi Germany were gigantic feats of construction containing wind tunnels, machine shops, assembly plants, launching pads, supply dumps, and accommodation for all who worked there, including adjoining camps for slaves, and yet very few people ever even knew they existed. Until I did the research, Nick, I didn't even know that these existed."
Yeah.
These large underground facilities in Germany.
Mm-hmm. Not something they teach you in school.
Not something that you're taught in school, absolutely not. Mm-hmm. But they did exist, and describing them would get you labeled a conspiracy theorist, but nevertheless, they are there. By March of 1945, the total number of Nazi submarines had reached about 463. This was recorded by British historian Basil Liddell Hart. Of those 463, about 159 U-boats surrendered to the Allies, Nick. 203 were scuttled by their crews, and this left about 100 Nazi subs that were unaccounted for at the war's end.
Wow.
Now, in relation to Antarctica, check this out. An unmarked German U-boat surrendered to the Argentine Navy on June 10, 1945. Exactly 1 month later, a U-530 surrendered at Mar del Plata in Argentina. Just over a month later, on August 17th of 1945, the U-977 also surrendered at Mar del Plata. That same month, another sub, the U-465, was scuttled off the coast of Patagonia. These were large subs designed for transporting quantities of supplies and material. Even the U-530's chief torpedo officer, Wilhelm von Hatt, revealed that his sub had landed at Antarctica, offloaded several crates that they believe contained documents as well as Nazi relics. What do you think about the testimony, even at Nuremberg, about the submarine bases and going to Antarctica?
Yeah, very, very interesting. Also, the fact that there were so many that were unaccounted for. So now you've named like 4 that had surrendered or had been caught. But what about the other 95, 96?
What about the other 95 or 96? Yeah. Where are they at?
There could be these submarines floating around right now in certain parts of the world, and they don't even know the war's over. They're not really sure what's going on. They're just waiting for the next battle.
Still waiting for the next battle.
Yes.
Then there was 2 expeditions which did take place, or supposedly one of them took place. The other one was a definite. In 1947, the expedition by Admiral Richard E. Byrd, and also a British Special Force unit, I guess, was sent to Antarctica in the late days of 1945 as well, and that was well documented. Now, Robert Byrd wrote in 2005, so just not too long ago, he said, Operation Tabarin, named for a Paris nightclub, was activated as a measure of monitoring German activities on the Antarctic continent. The known British bases, which the British apparently had bases there as well, were mainly in the Antarctic Peninsula in places such as Port Lockroy and Hope Bay and on the islands surrounding the peninsula. So now we have British bases as well, Nick.
Right. And you said that there was very little remnants found of the, or evidence found for the Nazi bases, but there was that one ice sculpture of the swastika they found.
Right. Yes, that was found.
Yeah.
It was interesting because there's a lot of books written about this, and I had, it's funny how the universe works, because I had picked up this story, and then I was reading a series called Area 51. And in the story, they talked about how these guys went to Antarctica. There was an expedition like this, and they went down into these large underground caverns and found fleets of German UFOs, which the Germans had perfected. They weren't alien technology.
Right.
It was human technology.
Right.
And Hitler was obsessed with producing this alternative energy.
Yeah.
Alternative free energy, something we're going to talk about. It's funny because a lot of people think that the Vril Society were connected with these interdimensional spirits. The women of the Vril Society never cut their hair. They let it just grow out. And they thought that was like an antenna to connect them to these spirits or whatnot. And many people believe that, especially that sighting over Berlin, that these UFOs were aliens and helping the Nazis, who were extremely deep into occultism, the hidden, what wasn't necessarily on the surface. And people think that the aliens helped them. It's also funny that Nikola Tesla, who developed free energy or free electricity, believe that maybe aliens helped him as well. According to an unnamed survivor, a member of the British Special Forces, there's a whole extensive story about this man. He went to the Falkland Islands for a special Arctic training in the fall of 1945, and I believe for the most part that all of this is definitely documented. It was led by veterans of the Norwegian resistance and accompanied by an unmanned scientist. This special unit of British soldiers traveled to Antarctica. Now, it was told to Robert Byrd by this man that the original scientists and commandos had found an ancient tunnel, as they called it, and under orders the force went through the tunnel, but only 2 returned before the Antarctic winter set in. During the winter months, the 2 survivors made absurd claims over the radio about what they called polar men.
Polar men,
Nick.
Is this like frozen Germans, or
It's like frozen German popsicles, yes. They talked about polar men, ancient tunnels, and Nazis. And some of this, I don't know if this is recorded, but it's probably documented in a transcript. Radio contact was finally lost in July of 1945, and for their mission, they went into the unknown. The last broadcast brought them further anxiety, as the final broadcast they picked up, I guess, they heard the voice that the polar men had found them, and then screams, and then contact was lost.
Wow, this sounds like an excellent movie.
It sounds like an excellent movie.
Yeah.
Why have we tried to make this, and then we had to make it into a comedy.
Right.
So I threw the script out. Is what had happened there.
Yeah, it's really kind of amazing though when you think about it.
It is an amazing story, and whether or not this is true, based on some form of fact, some form of mythos, it's an interesting story, and someone wrote this somewhere, whether it was based off of facts or
Right.
they had an amazing imagination.
Yeah, and I find it very interesting that this is the first time I'm ever hearing it.
Right. This is, and you know what? That is actually something that makes me think. Not just because you maybe haven't heard it, but there's probably a lot of people who haven't heard it. Even in my research, this does not come up very much.
Right.
And when it does, it's all about, well, these are just aliens from another dimension or another planet. I'm trying to take it a step further, and when I look into this, I find that issue is that not many people know about it, which might mean that it's actually closer to the truth than we think.
Right.
Because a lot of times these stories like Area 51 and Roswell, they're pushed so much into the public spectrum, into the public forum, that everyone knows about it, everyone's got their own opinion about it. And yes, that may be done to discredit it more so because everybody's got their opinion about it.
Right.
But then it also might be done to cover up another fact, and stories like this might be covered up so well that nobody knows about them.
Right.
And if you know about it and no one else knows about it, even if it is considered a conspiracy theory in the alternative realm, and you know about it, you get labeled even crazier than the conspiracy theorists.
Sure. Well, this is all research that was documented, obviously, by someone. And if the government or whoever it may be doesn't want to show up in textbooks and let it be known by anyone, well, then that's going to happen.
And there's a part of this which is well documented. Harry Truman even tried to stop this expedition, and his military advisors advised him, you do not do this. We will go through with this military expedition, aka scientific research, but we're going to send down aircraft carriers and bombs and missiles and mines, and we're going to just send a whole military down to Antarctica because we need scientific photographs.
Yeah, which they obviously needed also for the Icemen.
For the Icemen, the polar men.
Polar men, yes.
The polar men.
I like that.
So this survivor, Nick, he went on to describe tunnels. He said the Nazis had constructed a huge base into the caverns and had even built docks for U-boats, and one was identified supposedly, one of these U-boats. They never gave a number. Still, the deeper they traveled, the more stranger visions they were greeted with. They were down in one of these tunnels. The survivor reported that the hangars for strange planes and excavations galore had been documented. Robert Byrd reported. Now, a lot of people say, well, it's really cold down there, they would have died. Well, This is heated from geothermal heat from inside the earth.
Yeah.
This account of an anonymous source by Robert would be easy to dismiss, except that the details closely match a separate account given by the U-boat 530's captain, Bernhardt, as published in his book 1988, or his 1988 book, Adolf Hitler and the Secrets of the Holy Lance, co-authored by Colonel Howard Boichner, a respected New Orleans physician and former medical officer with the U.S. Army's 45th Infantry Division, during World War II. According to the story, on May 1st, 1945, a Colonel Maximilian Hartmann delivered the ashes of Adolf Hitler and his still-living wife, Eva Braun, to the commander of the U-977 U-boat to be sent to the Nazi base in Antarctica. Now, just because we haven't... People say, well, we would have found it on satellites by now if it existed. Well, just because we haven't found it officially doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Of course. Yeah, and who's to say we haven't found it?
Exactly.
All it means is that they haven't told us about it.
Who's to say? I mean, does the everyday average person have access to military satellites and thermal imaging?
Exactly.
No. So just because we have no evidence in the public spectrum, even in the private federal spectrum, in the black budget programs that monitor or possibly monitor this kind of stuff, just because it's there, they might not even understand fully what it is.
Right.
Because you haven't even heard about this.
Not at all.
Some people probably haven't heard about this. It's not necessarily that this base, even if it was true, that it was established for any type of control or any type of power. It could have just been established for something a little bit more, something hidden, something occult. This strange tale also included an account concerning the recovery of the fabled Heilige Lance, or Holy Lance, also known as the Spear of Destiny. Do you know what the Spear of Destiny is?
No, I do not.
That is the spear that the Roman soldier, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Gaius Cassius, or Longinus, by legend, he shoved it into the side of Jesus while he was on the cross to shorten his agony.
Yes.
And supposedly it's in the Hofburg Museum in Vienna, but in this story it says that one is essentially a fake. But it is true that Hitler was desperately looking for this spear because you could use it for good or evil in a way, and it had an incredible power to it.
Interesting.
Now back to Boichner, he said he saw the logbook, or he was, shown the logbook from a 1979 expedition to Antarctica. There's another one in the 70s, which used helicopters to reach the deserted Nazi base. The logbook stated as followed: our lights penetrated the steel tunnels, which extends for approximately about 10 meters. When we arrive at the end of the tunnel, we find ourselves in a huge cavernous area. We penetrate into the cavern, the distance of about 300 meters. It is at this point that we came to a smaller cavern, which turned towards the right and ended up in a room approximately 80 meters in width and 10 meters in height. It is here that the Reich treasures are hidden. At this point stands a small obelisk, about a meter in height, which marks the spot. There is an inscription which reads as follows, quote, there are truly more things in heaven and, parenthesis, in earth than man has dreamt. Beyond this point is Agartha, signed by Nazi occultist Karl Haushofer in 1943. Do you know what Agartha is?
No.
Garth is like the city of wisdom. I think it is symbolic and it is mythological in the terms of Garth is also associated with the people that lived inside of the earth, the white brotherhood, if you will. White like the Aryan race, in a sense.
Right.
Talked about by the Theosophical Society, and all of that we're going to get to in just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
It also talks about 4 items, at least 4 of the items that were recovered from Antarctica were the Holy Lance, a bronze plaque prized by Hitler, a 1934 watercolor painting by Hitler entitled, quote, Germania and the Appointment of the Gods at the Beginning of the World, end quote, and the infamous Blood Flag, a sacred Nazi relic from the 1923 beer hall Putsch. And while all of this could be chalked up to some sort of fantasy, it fails to explain the well-documented 1946 to 1947 military expedition to Antarctica, codenamed Operation High Jump, led by Admiral Richard Byrd. The task force was under the command of Admiral Richard H. Cruzen and continues to be the largest Antarctic expedition ever organized. It remains a mystery that convinced the Navy to fund this massive task force to Antarctica or why it was rushed into operation so soon after the war ended. Harry Truman tried to stop the expedition but was compelled to rely on the advice of his military advisors to hold back. Named the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program, this U.S. Navy operation reached its destination in January of 1947 and lasted only until February. This force consisted of, listen to this, they sent this expedition to Antarctica to supposedly study science, some type of science expedition, take photographs, and map out the terrain.
Okay.
This force consisted of 4,700 men, 13 ships, including an aircraft carrier with 6 twin-engine transport planes and helicopters. Byrd made it plain that the operation's objectives were not diplomatic, scientific, or economic. According to the military, the expedition was hastily mounted to take advantage of the first Antarctic summer after the war. Near the end of January of 1947, a 2-pronged Renaissance sweep of Antarctica, an ice-free area, was discovered by one of the force's flying boats. Byrd described it as a land of blue and green lakes and brown hills and an otherwise limitless expanse of ice. The news, which this is a true story, the news deemed this Shangri-La, which is another form of Agartha or Asgard. The deaths of several members of this task force were never fully explained. They didn't even say that, well, it was just the cold. They said that they died in plane crashes and they blew up. I don't know what blew up. I mean, blow up. That was the explanation. They said, what happened to these guys? And they said they blew up. I mean, I don't know what.
Yeah, that could mean a number of things.
It could be a number of things, Nick.
Yeah.
Another fact that undermined the argument that the expedition was merely for exploration was that while members took more than 70,000 photographs of the Antarctic coastline, none were made with the reference markers necessary to match the photographs together for comprehensive view. They later went back and sent a very small task force of just a couple of people to go photograph the same area.
Right.
So Richard Byrd, upon his return from Antarctica, warned of the possibility, listen to this, the possibility of an attack from the polar regions by aircraft of incredible speed. It was reported on March 5th of 1947 in the edition of El Mercurio in Santiago, Chile. The reporter Lee Van Ada, who had accompanied Byrd, wrote, quote, Admiral Richard E. Byrd announced today that it is necessary for the United States to put into effort defensive measures against enemy airmen who come from the polar regions. The Admiral said, I have no intention of scaring anyone, but the bitter reality is that in case of a new war, the United States would be in a position of being attacked by aircraft that could fly with fantastic speed from one pole to the other. His manuscript was made public in 1970, Richard Byrd, that purported to be a secret diary. So Byrd reported sighting a small mountain range with what appeared to be a valley lined with green trees, a river or stream flowing through it. This diary also reported spotting a large animal that resembled a woolly mammoth. He said in the diary, and I quote, ahead we spotted what seemed to be a city. This is impossible. His aircraft seemed to light and oddly buoyant. The controls refused to respond. Off our port and starboard wings were a strange type of craft. They are closing rapidly alongside. They are disc-shaped and have radiant qualities to them. They are close enough to see the markings on them. I tug at the controls again. They will not respond. We are caught in an invisible grip of some type. Our radio crackles and a voice comes through in English with what happens to be a slight Nordic or Germanic accent. This message is, and I could give the German accent. You're good at accents.
Yes.
You're good at accents. He says, "Welcome, Admiral, to our domain. We shall land you in exactly 7 minutes. Relax, Admiral, you are in good hands. I note the engines of our plane have stopped running, and the aircraft is under some strange control. The narrative states that after a floating landing, Byrd and his radio man were taken on a conveyance with no wheels to the city, which seems to be made of a crystal material. He's up at the North Pole. His plane is taken in by essentially a tractor beam, and he's lowered to the ground inside of a crystal city." Now, German is also the language of the Aldebaran race, one of the root races. Madame Blavatsky, the Russian mystic who established the Theosophical Society. We have the Thule Society as well, which funded the German Workers' Party, became the Nazi Party. Hitler was a member of the military at the time. He was offered to come into the German Workers' Party, and so on and so forth. The symbol, the logo of Madame Blavatsky's society is actually an Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail, eternity, with a swastika on top. And it influenced the Nazi Party greatly, possibly one of the reasons they chose this symbol. And they said, well, they chose it because it meant strength. Well, it did mean strength, and that's why it was on the Theosophical Society. It meant something else also. It meant the sun. The Theosophical Society believed in Ubermen, supermen, Uber, German, super, men who lived inside of the earth. They were the White Brotherhood and the Aryan race, one of the root races. That was part of the Theosophical Society, part of the occult doctrine of the German Nazis.
Interesting.
I think it would take several hundred years before you could display that and people wouldn't immediately associate it with the Nazis. Hello, I'm Tim Marshall, and I've got a new paperback out, Worth Dying For: The Power and Politics of Flags. The swastika goes back a long way, certainly before it became this symbol of evil. In the Chinese Book of Silk, you see comets, and some of them are spinning in such a way that you actually get the swastika in the sky, and ancient peoples will have seen this, and so it became a sign of something. And in the Indian culture, it certainly became a sign of good luck and hope. The Nazis then turned that around. I mean, they physically reversed the swastika, and of course then it became a symbol of evil. And that's really problematic because in our culture it's evil, but you see it over in Asia and of course it's not. And should it be banned here? That's contextual. Obviously it shouldn't be banned in a particular sort of temple, but you might, if you choose, want to ban it, let's say at a political rally. What happened under the swastika will become ancient history, and only at that point will it fade and its original meaning might rise. In the context of the swastika and a flag, I think in the European context we are decades, who knows, centuries away from it being shown without that connotation. In other parts of the world, of course, it remains what it was, a peaceful symbol.
There are so many crosses that you see in Japanese temples that are,
Those are the square cross.
These are the square cross. And do they have any connection backwards? And if so, when they put the little ends on them, they look like the swastika backwards. Do you know what connection that has?
Well, they are swastikas. The cross is the earth, is the world of matter. The swastika, which suggests movement, is the sunrise turn, or in reverse, the counter-sunrise turn. And what it refers to is the circumambulation of the mystical center of the temple. All temples are built in the form, really, of the prime image structuring of a temple is in the form of a cross. Sanctuary in the center, the four gates. This is symbolic of the form of the universe, which is a circle with four gates, north, south, east, and west, sunrise, sunset, north, south. And in the center is the mystery of the fifth, the point, the hub, where opposites come together. Where the Buddha sat was right there. That's where the tree of the garden is. And here is where opposites come together and are dissolved, where movement and stillness are identified. And that's the cross. And then the swinging around the cross shows the movement around the center. Lao Tzu uses this image in the Tao Te Ching of the hub. Yeah.
Robert Graves talks about the swastika as a fire wheel, which would also give another perspective of that.
Well, it's a fire wheel, and the sun is a fire wheel.
Yeah.
and the sun goes on the revolution. The question of the origin of the swastika is a moot question. It is not pinned down yet, and there are guesses. A prime guess, and a very good one, is that it began in late Paleolithic times with representations of the stork. The stork is a killer of serpents. And now we come to a whole body of symbols that I propose to speak about later. This one of fire and water, the eagle, stork, the serpent, the lion, the bull, the sun, and the moon. These all belong in polar consistency to the same symbolic context. The swastika may belong there. The earliest swastika of which we have any knowledge was found in the Ukraine in a late Paleolithic Magdalenian site, and it is on the lower wings of what seems to be a kind of a bird. We don't know what kind of bird it was, but this big swastika is described on the lower wings, an extremely elaborate one. That's a kind of unique occurrence of the swastika. The historic occurrence comes with the about late 5th and early 4th millenniums BC in the ceramic art known as the Samarra style of Iran. It appears in Susa and all those places. And there the swastika comes in the center of these ceramic designs. This is the period when the beautiful painted pottery ware in geometric organization appears first. And this goes into China and India and all over the world and to the Americas.
A strange alien, and yet so is this. This is called the alien astronaut, and although the world teaches these things to our children, it is also our undoing, because this alien astronaut isn't. This is the constellation of Orion. And more than that, it is two geoglyphs laying one upon another. The first is his face. It's not a face. These are two black holes, which together creates a hole in the sun. Yes, this ancient astronaut's face represents the sun. The sun stands in a doorway and invites mankind into the cosmos and to the place of Orion. To confirm this connection, notice that this alien's face looks identical, and he is holding a club in one hand and a star in the other. This also is Orion. And now this, a Hopi Indian petroglyph from the Americas, and this one is from Nazca. Notice their message is exactly the same. The reason is because this is a world message. It is not meant for one tribe or one people. It is meant for every human being on this planet. And the reason is because in order for us to survive, it will take all of us together as one.
It doesn't matter what it means. If you can't prove it's legitimate, what does it mean? It's a comic. So let's look at this site, but let's not do it the way they do it, which is talk about the content. I want to talk about the context of the site and what's around there first. And we'll get to the carry-on glyphs at the end, and hopefully we'll get to Trina's site. I think we will. Okay, let's go a bit quickly. Okay, let's look at the area around carry-on. You will not get to carry-on when we're there. We're going to be there for 2 minutes. We're moving on. That's where we start. We came to this place and we were taken to that place by a senior park ranger of that area who had a degree in geology. And he took us to this. 21 pictures it took us to get that, waited for the sun to come out. It's an Ankh. It's an Ankh. And according to him, and this is where it gets scary, ladies and gentlemen, he says it's 10,000 years old. I can tell you now, we're on that platform, it was the oldest one there, wasn't it, by a long way. It's at least 8,000 to 9,000 years, but hang on, Thoth, the Ankh, starts 5,000 years ago in Egypt. What's it doing here? And here's something interesting. You can't see this, but trust me. There are 3 footprints there. It's an ibis. If anyone knows Thoth, he's got 2 incarnations. Ape, ibis. There's the ibis. What's that doing there? Shouldn't be there. But it is. And that's not Egyptian. That's done by a... Yeah, you sort of knew. I had to look a bit, but it wasn't too bad, all things being equal. Same area. I'm not going to carry on, but here's something odd. Up the top there, I got an ibis head in profile. Original people can profile animals, they can't profile people. I need to see both their eyes. That's wrong. And you know what's even more wrong is this. The bottom half of this, that's Duramulin. Duramulin is the son of Byami. And when you look, remember Byami doesn't have 1 leg? Duramulin has a club foot. There it is. So bottom half, Aboriginal mob. Top half, Thoth, Egyptian. Or is it Egyptian? That's my point. Is it Egyptian? I'm so sure about that now. What's he doing here? He shouldn't be here. Shouldn't have it on profile anyway. Let's look. We've done the god of knowledge, which is Thoth. Let's do the god of inheritance now. There is the glyph for the god of inheritance. Look at that right angle for the elbow, exactly the same. What's that doing there? It's right next to Thoth. So the 2 things I'm finding in Australia are the god of inheritance and the god of knowledge. Here is a glyph that a lot of people have proved, oh, the New Agers came and fiddled this in, they call this the dog bone glyph, and they all said it's not, it's a fake. 1134, it is not a fake, it's Proto-Egyptian, it means heritage or lot, something given to you, is a definite glyph.
The holy knowledge of this Italian fresco is unbelievably found here, the Great Pyramid of Egypt. It is a perfection of architecture that many believe was created by the sons of God. The pyramid represents the sun, and viewing it from above tells us that it is also perfectly aligned due north, and it has 8 cardinal points built within it for direction. Nevertheless, this holy knowledge of the sun is useless without this. This is one of the first pictures of Jesus ever made. Although the faithful see Jesus, the Lord, the wise see the symbol behind him, the symbol of the cross. In the ancient world, Jesus was seen as the Son of God, but then again, the cross behind him is what gave him his authority, because in the ancient world, the crossed circle actually means God the Father, God the Creator. This is why both of these figures are found in this painting. One is the Son, the other is God the Father. God is with the Son, and the Son is with God. A cross and a pyramid linked together. The reason that this is so important is because when you place a cross upon the pyramid, you will get a message. And the message is directions. The pyramid has 8 cardinal points of direction, and the pyramid represents the sun. And when the cross is placed upon the sun monument, it gives us navigational directions. And when it is turned, it leads us to only one place: the Stargate. Look again at this fresco. You see God, and you see his Son. But then, look at God. Closer. Notice, his halo isn't a halo. It is a pyramid. A great pyramid. And now look at his Son, Jesus. He no longer has a halo either. Look closely. It's a cross. When you put these two together, Father and Son, there is a message, and it is holy and holier than holy. And it leads us to look again at this strange globe. Still your hearts, children of men, for what you are seeing is not a globe. It's not earth. It's our salvation. Because what you're seeing isn't a sphere at all. It's actually a hole. And that tiny light is the sun. And although we see the sun shining within our skies, always know a sun isn't a planet. It's more than a star. It's a hole in space. And remember, a hole with 3 dimensions looks like a sphere. Children of men, this is the Stargate. We know that this is the sun, and we know that this is the cosmos. And yet there is one more thing we must not forget. Although the world teaches that the bird is the symbol of the Holy Spirit, it isn't. The Great Pyramid of Egypt tells us the pyramid is made for the house of God, and behind the head of God is the pyramid. The house of God, according to the Egyptians, is found in the constellation of Triangulum, and this knowledge will explain why this large bird is above God and his Son. Everything in this painting represents the cosmos, and that which we believe to be a dove is actually a celestial marker to ensure we reach our destination. For nearly 500 years, we've all been told that it is the symbol of the Holy Spirit, and sadly, it is not. It hovers above the house of God because this is actually the constellation of Cygnus. Yes, this is more than a painting. It is more than a fresco. Children of Earth, this is a map. If you unfurl this constellation map, you will see the constellation of Cygnus, the bird, hovering above the house of God, a house that is found in the Triangulum constellation.
Moving along. The star markers. Okay, when you get closer, this was all I known already. There are at least 4,500 to 5,000 star markers within 3 to 4 k's of the glyphs, all the way around. They're everywhere. The original people are obsessed with upstairs. There's a famous saying, as on top, so below. I can tell you this now, every sacred site in this country must have a counterpart up here, or it's not sacred. Everything. Every sacred site, they must be able to point. The elders have told me, if they can't give you the dreaming story and a star or constellation, walk away, they're lying. They're obsessed with this. And of course the star markers, these little characters here, take around about 1,000 percussion points to make them. And there's 5,000 around there. That's a lot of work. Now what's fascinating about these star markers is, and I'm hoping this is the next one up, right, there's one platform we're working on. We've started marking it now. There are around about 900 star markers on that one platform. It's the largest accumulation of star markers in the world, all in the same area. You see, I'm starting to get a feel for the area now and what it's like. Now it gets even more interesting, I'm hoping. It does. Because directly above the glyphs, has anyone been to the glyphs here? Has some people been there? Well, not that many. Okay. If you climb above the glyphs and you go a little bit further to the side, you'll find the first star chart. And there it is. Apparently, we thought it was a myth, didn't we? We didn't.
It's like an urban myth. Yeah.
We'd heard about it. Everyone spoke about the fact that Paul White was up there, and there's a lady called Michelle that went up the top and looked at the star markers and then mapped them and took them to Sydney Uni. Sydney Uni said they can't find it anymore, and they still claim they can't find it. But luckily, we did them a favour. We found it. That's the map, and it's dated by them, and it's 4,600 years old. And do you know why that's important? Because the Proto-Egyptian that's supposed to be done at the glyphs is supposed to be 4,600 years old. So's the chart. Why did the original people mark that chart directly above the glyphs? You could say it was a coincidence, but by God, we're pushing a lot of coincidence. We haven't got there yet. We haven't got there, but we're getting close.
It is overpowering to the mind and overpowering to the soul. And yet there is one more piece of this puzzle that we have yet to see. Look at this part of the sphere. This is the entryway into the cosmos. It leads us to the hallowed of hallows, for the opening will take us to the house of God. Bless your hearts and bless your minds. For nearly 500 years, none of us on earth were worthy enough to be given this knowledge. It is a knowledge that is above knowledge, a knowledge that the ancients called the All. It is a God knowledge that only the holiest could receive, and today we receive it, and we can only hope that we will be worthy of it.
Cygnus is the constellation of the Swan, or celestial bird. It's also known as the Northern Cross, and it's a series of stars in the shape of a cross. And it's very prominent in the skies, particularly in the summer. Indeed, its brightest star, Deneb, forms part of what's known as the Summer Triangle, with two other stars, which are Vega and Altair. And for the ancients, it would seem that this area of the sky was very, very important. Initially because it's placed on the Milky Way, the edge of our own galaxy, which is this huge starry stream that crosses from one side of the sky to the other, that was always seen as a path or road on which the souls of the dead could enter the afterlife. And they would make a leap of faith onto the Milky Way at a certain point, and that point generally was associated with the constellation of Orion, obviously another very important star group in ancient traditions. However, it would then carry on its journey until it reached a point where the Milky Way bifurcated or broke into two separate streams. And these two separate streams were seen as a bridge with like two possibilities. One, if the soul was bad, it would go into oblivion, or possibly reincarnation. If the soul had been good, was righteous, it would continue along the other stream and enter into the afterlife. And therefore, the stars of Cygnus that corresponded to the position of this bifurcation of the Milky Way became associated with the entry of the soul into the next world. And adding to all of this is the fact that around 15,000 BC, the stars of Cygnus, for a period of around that time of around 3,000 years, was the so-called turning point of the heavens, the place that's occupied today by Polaris, the pole star, although at that time it was the bright star Deneb in Cygnus that was the pole star. And ancient shamanic tradition has seen this position, which is correctly known as the Northern Celestial Pole, as the point of exit from the physical world and the entry into the sky world. So all of those ideas came together in Paleolithic times. And it's for this reason that in cave art across southwest Europe, particularly in the Lascaux cave in the Dordogne region of France, you see images that are clearly of the night sky. Archaeoastronomers have written about this, and they've said it's focusing on the northern heavens and the Cygnus constellation in particular. And it's usually represented as a bird on a pole or a birdman or something like that. And it would seem as if the association of that constellation with a bird is extremely ancient and goes back to Paleolithic times. And why a bird? Because a bird was seen to carry the soul from this world to the next and to bring souls into incarnation. I mean, we all know the story about the stork bringing babies into the world, a popular European folk tradition. However, it's a fact that in several countries of Europe, and I suspect probably more in the past, it was the swan that brought babies into the world. But of course, we're not talking about real babies here, because quite clearly they grow inside the womb of a mother. We're talking about bringing the souls of newborn children into this world. And somehow that's become distorted across time. So you've got the idea of these soul birds, a swan in Europe and Asia, in other parts of the world, different birds. For instance, in North America, the same tradition was associated with raptor birds like hawks and eagles. In the Near East and what is today Turkey, it was the vulture. The vulture. Why a vulture? Because a vulture was associated with the act of sky burial, which is also known as excarnation. This is the idea that the bodies of the dead were placed out, generally on a wooden platform, and vultures would come down and peck the bodies clean of their flesh, leaving behind the bones, which would then be collected up and either interred or the skull occasionally used for oracular purposes, communication with the ancestors. And because of that, the vulture became associated with the idea of carrying the soul from this world to the next, and again bringing it into this world. This is shown not only at places like Göbekli Tepe, the largest and most important stone temple complex in the world, dates to about 9,500 BC, and that's in southeast Turkey, but also at many other sites in this region, like Çatalhöyük. This is this town or urban centre of the Neolithic going back to about 7,000 BC in southern central Turkey. Here you see images on the walls of vultures that are swooping down and seem to be picking clean the bodies of the dead, but also you see the vultures having human fetuses in their back. They're bringing souls into the world. And some, you see a head, just a head in the shape of a ball with just a couple of eyes and a mouth, being taken under the wings of vultures, as if they're protecting this, which is the symbol of the soul. That the skull or the head became the symbol of the soul. And this particular image, the idea of the vultures taking the head into their care, is like them taking the soul into their possession and then taking it and accompanying it to the sky world. That sky world was almost certainly in the vicinity of the Cygnus constellation. And it's interesting that in the Near East and in neighbouring Armenia, the symbol for Cygnus is the vulture. And even in Egypt, we find the symbol of the soul was also a bird. The higher aspect of the soul, which is known as the Ak, was represented by the ibis bird. The Ba, which is another part of the soul, was represented by the hawk. And we can see there these same traditions which we find elsewhere in the world, not just in Europe and in Asia, but also in North American tradition and even in the Pacific. Cygnus was a bird of paradise that was associated with creation and bringing life into the world on various specific islands like Hawaii.
Elongated skulls all over the world. When you look at Egypt, there are countless depictions of the pharaohs having these weirdly elongated skulls. This includes Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their daughter Meritaten. In the case of Meritaten, there are multiple granite busts that you can see that were carved of her, in which she clearly has no hair and has this freakishly elongated skull. And remember, this is a culture that was apparently building pyramids at the time that these sculptures were made. The people with the elongated skulls had apparently been keeping their lineage secret and hidden in the Egyptian priesthood. But then remember that Egypt became weak and it was conquered by Rome. What happened when the Romans got in there is that they made a secret agreement with these people in the Egyptian priesthood who still had the elongated skulls, and they created a safe haven for them in the Vatican City. The Library of Alexandria was burned down, but only with a false flag, where they burned tax documents and census documents. They took all the good stuff that included books from before they came to Earth and relocated that to the Vatican Library. Then you go across to the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and once again you have a pyramid building culture in Mesoamerica with people depicted in their inscriptions who have elongated skulls. And unlike the case of Egypt, with Mesoamerica we now have the added benefit that there are multiple elongated skulls that have been dug up and were not censored, but are actually on display in museums in places like Bolivia. We have the researcher Brian Forster, who is bringing out new examples of elongated skulls, and they are being genetically tested, they're being analyzed, and they have clear physiological differences from the skulls that the rest of us have. These people have very large brains. Discover Magazine in the year 2009 came out with an article called "What Happened to the Hominids Who Were Smarter Than Us?" And it describes how in the early 20th century, elongated skulls were found in Boskop, South Africa, thus earning them the name the Boskop skulls. And they were given ceremonial burials. Apparently these people were revered in their society. But the article claims that the brain volume is almost twice what ours would be, and thus the average person in their society would have an IQ of 150, and some of them could have an IQ that goes up to 300. These weird elongated skulls were also found in a dig in Siberia in a town called Omsk, and the men who dug them up were so afraid that many of them actually started crying and left their jobs and refused to come back. We furthermore see in the case of the Mongolian conquerors that there were reports of them having weird elongated skulls. And most recently, even in Europe, we have found tombs of the nobility, the wealthy people who preserve their bloodlines, such as in France. And they also have this bizarre elongated skull feature. It wasn't until insiders started talking to me that I thought about the fact that in the Vatican, you see people wearing these mitre hats, and those hats would very nicely conceal an elongated skull. These people with elongated skulls would look like us in their faces, and the hat would conceal the only thing that would make them appear to be different. My research also turned up data on an Italian noble family from the 14th century known as the d'Este clan, and the d'Este clan had very close ties to the Vatican. What's so bizarre is when you look at a painting of Prince Leonello d'Este and someone who is either his sister or his wife, the scholars don't really know, they usually call her Princess d'Este. They both have freakishly elongated skulls in this painting. The story gets even more interesting when you trace the descendants of the d'Este clan, the lineage that they left behind. For what you find is that King George I, who began ruling in 1714, was a direct bloodline descendant of these people who obviously had the elongated skulls in the 1400s. And then you find out that a variety of earlier British consorts, meaning nobility, also were direct descendants of the d'Este clan. Then it gets even more outrageous when you discover that the royal families of Norway, Sweden, Spain, and Denmark are all descendants of the same elongated skull d'Este clan. And let's not forget that only recently we found royal tombs in France and other countries in Europe in which the nobility again had these elongated skulls. And if you think this only has to do with divine right of kings and European nobility, you would be wrong. In 1988, an article in the New York Times traced fully 13 out of all of the 40 U.S. presidents at the time as having a direct bloodline connection to European nobility. In 2012, a 12-year-old girl named Bridget d'Avignon actually did a much more complex genealogical study of the U.S. presidents using the power of the internet and computers.
On the School Watch tonight, the story of a 7th grader from Salinas who claims to have made a major discovery about President Obama. She and her grandfather say that President Obama is related to all but one U.S. president.
And she found that 42 out of 43 U.S. presidents all had a common ancestor in King John I from England. And this is not just any old king. This is the guy who actually chartered the Magna Carta, which became the defining element that turned into the British Constitution.
D'Avignon says she spent countless hours on the internet over the summer researching the lineage of our presidents, a project that started with her trying to trace her own family tree.
But I'm the first historian to do all the presidents.
So that's almost all of the U.S. presidents that we've ever had. The bottom line is these people are tracking their lineage, they're tracking their bloodline, and they're making sure that their own people get steered into the positions of the highest power and influence worldwide, including the United States of America.
In Quebec City, a ceremonial parade was held for the royal couple, and a goat with gold horns and a blue jacket was marched in front of Prince William. The billy goat is descended from Queen Elizabeth's private stock of royal goats. Billy is a nickname for William. In this photograph, Prince William is wearing a Royal Air Force patch that displays a goat head symbol. The goat head is a symbol for the goat of Mendes, which represents Satan and the Antichrist. The Baphomet is another name for the goat of Mendes. It is the deity that is worshipped by the Knights Templar. Today, the Baphomet pentagram is the official symbol of the Church of Satan. In black magic, the Baphomet is the source and creator of all evil. It is portrayed as half human, half goat. This symbol can be traced from ancient Sumer in Egypt right through to its global use today in modern witchcraft. The ancient Sumerians made clay tablets describing the extraterrestrial god Enki, who genetically engineered the human race with his demon seed. The symbols for Enki and Satan are the same, the goat and the snake. The goat symbol played an important role on September 11, 2001. George W. Bush was reading a story about a pet goat to a group of school children when he was informed that a second plane had hit the World Trade Center and that America was under attack. Look closely. The book held by the president is upside down. Why? Because Satanism inverts images. Bush remained seated for 7 minutes and kept reading about the goat while Americans were burning alive and leaping to their death from the burning towers. In most tarot card decks, the devil card shows the Baphomet sitting on an altar above 2 naked human demons chained to his seat. He is holding a flaming torch in his left hand that is inverted towards the earth. On his forehead is an upside-down pentagram. When points on a pentagram point upwards, They symbolize the devil attacking the heavens with its horns. The horned hand signal is a satanic salute that communicates an allegiance to Satan. The extended index and small fingers symbolize the horns of Satan. The Antichrist or beast is clearly identified in biblical prophecy as the number 666. When Prince William is crowned king, his formal title will be King William V. Hidden within his name are the words I am. Also hidden within his name is the number 666 in Roman numerals. The Roman numeral I appears 3 times in his name. The Roman numeral V also appears 3 times in his name. The letter W is really 2 V's placed side by side. The number 666 in Roman numerals is VI, VI, VI. It is hidden in the name King William V, and so are the words I am. The hidden message built into his name is, I am 666. I am the Antichrist. The flag-waving public were too hypnotized by the fairy tale media hype to even question why a hymn called Jerusalem was featured at William's wedding. Here are the main lyrics of the hymn. Why are the ruling families singing about the fight to build Jerusalem at William's wedding of the century? The answer lies in the UK's Union Jack flag. No one has bothered to question why the Union Jack flag is called the Union Jack. Who is Jack? The answer is Jack-Ub. Jack-Ub, or Jacob, is the patriarch of the Jews. According to biblical scripture, Jacob laid his head on a stone and dreamt about a ladder reaching to heaven. The stone is said to be the same stone that has been placed beneath the throne chair of every British monarch during their coronation ceremony. It's called the Stone of Jacob. The Stone of Jacob will also be placed beneath William's throne chair when he is crowned king. Most of us were taught revisionist history in school. To make sense out of what's going on in the world today, we need to learn a few simple facts about Israel's history without the revisions. According to the Bible story, Jacob fathered 12 Hebrew sons who invaded the land of Canaan. Canaan was the homeland of the Philistine people. After defeating the Philistines, the 12 Hebrew tribes carved up the land of Canaan into 12 tribal districts. They renamed the land of Canaan Israel, Israel, after their gods, Isis, Amun-Ra, and Elohim. By 69 AD, Roman soldiers burned the city of Jerusalem to the ground and destroyed the Hebrew Temple of Solomon. All that remained of the Jewish temple was a wall, which still stands today in the city of Jerusalem. After the 12 Hebrew tribes fled from the land of Canaan, which they had renamed Israel, the Romans gave the land back to the Philistines and called it Palestine. Palestine was the Romanized word for Philistine. Today, the descendants of the Philistines are the Palestinians of Palestine. Where did the 12 tribes of Israel go after they fled from the land they had renamed Israel? The serpent tribe of Dan became seafaring pirates. They emblazoned the symbols of the snake and dragon on their red and white flag, together with the crest of an eagle. According to Bible prophecy, the Antichrist will descend from the tribe of Dan. carvings of snakes and dragons on their ships, the red and white stripes on their sails, and archaeological relics reveal that the tribe of Dan became the dreaded Vikings. These ferocious seafaring pirates raped, burned, and looted their way up the coast of Europe into the British Isles, incorporating the name of their tribal leader Dan into towns and rivers along their migration route, like the mighty river Danube and the Jordan River. Since vowels were interchangeable in the original Hebrew language, Dan could be pronounced Din, Don, or Den. It was embedded in the name London, Scandinavia, Sweden, and Denmark. Denmark literally means the mark of Dan. By 1016 AD, the Viking king Canute seized the throne of England, Denmark, and Sweden. Today's British royalty are descended from the serpent tribe of Dan and from the Viking kings whose symbol is the dragon. Prince Charles' coat of arms displays a red dragon and the German words Ich dien, which means I serve. I serve the red dragon. I serve Satan. Prince William's coat of arms also features a red dragon, which is partially hidden by a 3-point white label. Notice the checkered floor beneath William's wedding guests, which is a known symbol of Freemasonry. Rowan Williams, the Archbishop who married William and Kate, is a confirmed Druid member. Druid ceremonies include pagan sun worship in stone circles. Notice the sun symbolism on the back of the Archbishop's robe. Prince William and the British royal family claim descent from King David and the Jewish tribe of Judah, but the evidence shows they are descended from the tribe of Dan and the Viking kings, whose symbols are the snake and dragon. It took nearly 1,000 years for the tribes of Israel to reunite after fleeing from Jerusalem in 70 AD. They reunited in the British Isles under the flag of their Jewish patriarch, Jacob, or Jacob. It took another 1,000 years for the Jewish tribes to reclaim the land that the Romans had given back to the Philistines. How did they do it?
Let's have a look at what they had to say here. I'm going to very carefully open this up because, as I said, this is an original document from 1829. And here is the article. I'll read it to you now. Jerusalem. There is a report that the Rothschilds have purchased Jerusalem. We see nothing improbable that in the pecuniary distress of the Sultan, he should sell some part of his dominions to preserve the rest, or that the Rothschilds should purchase the ancient capital of their nation. They are wealthy beyond desire, perhaps even avarice, and so situated is quite reasonable to suppose that they may seek something else to gratify their ambitions that shall produce most important effects. If secured in the possession, and which may be brought about by money, they might instantly, as it were, gather a large nation together, soon to become capable of defending itself and having a wonderful influence over the commerce and the conditions of the East, rendering Judea again the place of a deposit of the large portion of the wealth of the ancient world. To the Sultan, the contrary is of no great value, but in the hands of the Jews, directed by such men as the Rothschilds, what might it not become, and in a short period of time? The Sultan is in great difficulty. Baron Rothschild was proceeding to Constantinople, and a second rebuilding of the temple is not among some of the most strange things expected in these strange times by some of the Jews. So there you have it, folks. The Rothschilds purchased Jerusalem, and as has been confirmed in this recent interview, they also formed the nation of Israel as we know it today.
In 1917, the British Earl of Balfour signed the Balfour Declaration, promising to give the nation of Palestine to Lord Rothschild and the Jewish Zionists. This criminal declaration was made even before the British had conquered the nation of Palestine at the end of World War I. During World War II, American corporations supplied gas, money, vehicles, and weaponry to Hitler and the Nazis. By the end of World War II, the British conquered and turned the Muslim nation of Palestine over to the Rothschild Zionists as promised. The Zionists populated the land with boatloads of Jewish refugees from Nazi concentration camps. By 1948, the name of the Muslim nation of Palestine was officially changed to the Jewish state of Israel. According to Jewish historian and best-selling author Simon Schama, the Rothschild Zionists financed illegal settlements on Palestinian land. They now own 80% of the Palestinian land that they renamed Israel. The 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center in New York City served as the perfect excuse to justify bombing, occupying, disarming, and bankrupting Israel's Muslim neighbors. It also scared hundreds of billions of tax dollars out of traumatized American citizens. "9/11 was a Zionist false flag operation. Within 24 hours of the attack, America launched a Blame the Muslims campaign that ignited the Zionist war of terror on the Muslim nations surrounding Israel. Ultimately, the grand scheme of the Zionist plot is to reclaim Jerusalem and rebuild Solomon's Temple, which was destroyed by the Romans almost 2,000 years ago. Israel's Jews pray at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, which is all that remains of Solomon's Temple.
Are you sure?